Okay, so thank you again for sparing your precious Friday evening time. And probably, Eric, you are in Hong Kong now, so it should be early in the morning. And also I have Anna here. So good to see you here too. As Professor Shin introduced, the topic of my presentation for today is investigating target tasks, task phases, and Indigenous criteria for military aviation English assessment. It actually came from my project on designing and validating online interactive aviation English test in Second Life. So the ultimate goal for this project was to demonstrate test validation in which claims about test score interpretations are supported by assumptions and backing under the framework of interpretive argument by Carol Chappell, my PhD advisor at Iowa State University. So the findings that I'm going to share is actually from this paper published in Language Assessment Quarterly a few years ago. So you may refer to this paper for detailed descriptions and procedures. Okay, so as a background for this study, as you may all know, aviation English is a subset of English for specific purposes related to aviation, including plain language and aviation phraseologies. And we have observed fatal consequences of miscommunication in aviation over the years. And given the significance of aviation English proficiency for air safety, International Civil Aviation Organization adopted language proficiency requirement, LPR, to promote standardized quality of aviation English tests. However, there have been some issues being reported about the quality of current practices of aviation English assessment in civil aviation context. But in case of military aviation context, especially in Korean Army aviation context, there have been quite a few issues that actually motivated me to get into this project. As a background of my own career, I used to serve in the Army aviation as an air traffic controller myself for 2.5 years. About 20-something years ago. But I was being trained in a very traditional, maybe Army method. So a lot of drilling and memorizing, and I had a strong impetus, like how I should help innovating the training or assessment in the military aviation communication or aviation English assessment, etc. So I have had keep close connections and relationships with my senior officers in the same military unit, and thankfully I could have the opportunity to collaborate with those expert military air traffic controllers in the Army aviation context when I was working on my doctoral degree at Iowa State University. So there was some connections between aviation English and myself. To share some issues from this particular Army aviation English assessment context in Korean setting. This is sample paper-based Army Aviation English test items. So the test prompts are actually written in Korean. I just translated for your better understanding. So these are some sample items, actually retired items. So it's okay to share. But as you can see, it is quite reading comprehension oriented, and the passage, the text is about aviation. But what the test takers are being measured is about their reading comprehension skills and grammatical knowledge, English vocabulary, and their ability to translate English into Korean. So as you can see, the questions include what is the topic of the passage, which is not appropriate for loading capacity for Apache helicopter. What is the meaning of the underlined sentence in Korean? So this in-house Army Aviation English test consists of all multiple choice question items focusing on those English grammar, reading, and vocabulary related to the theme of aviation. However, the current test does not focus on any component of listening or speaking skills. Which is the case of construct underrepresentation. So the test outcomes based on my preliminary study of those particular participants of the research who are military air traffic controllers in Korea, the test results from this paper-based Army Aviation English test is correlated with standardized like English assessment, like TOEIC test of English for international communication. So that means they do measure somewhat consistently regarding their linguistic like competence, but the test result was not actually related to their actual air traffic control ATC performance in this authentic military context. So the test users who were my former bosses, they complained and were very concerned that the test outcomes from this paper-based Army Aviation English test couldn't really indicate to what extent the test takers could really perform in a real-world setting. And they would also like to make use of the test outcomes to better provide corrective feedback or as an evidence or data for the air traffic controllers promotion or extra like training for better ATC performance. So there seems to be some discrepancy between test users' expected test uses and what the test could actually measure and provide. So regarding the theoretical foundation underlying this study, maybe I would adopt this assessment triangle. So as you can see, the corners of the triangle represent the three key elements underlying any kind of assessment, including this assessable project. So starting from the cognition corner indicates the target knowledge or skills needed for aviation English communication. So current in-house Army Aviation English tests could only measure test takers' English vocabulary, grammar, or reading skills. And it fails to assess test takers' speaking or listening performance, let alone with cognitive processes when they perform the certain air traffic control tasks. So based on Carol Chappell's interactionalist construct definition, it is highly emphasized that the role of cognitive processes, which is called strategic competence, which mediate test takers' innate knowledge or skill, like being facilitated in a certain test-taking context. I was highly inspired by this interactionalist construct definition. So an innovative task should be able to facilitate test takers like situated cognition, so that the test result could better predict the test taker's real-world task performance. So in order for a task to better facilitate test takers' strategic competence, in addition to their innate trait or being offered by the certain test-taking context, then this conventional paper-based aviation English test is not really satisfactory. So we do need more effort to come up with better ways to observe test takers' performance. So this is how I came up with the idea of developing a test with well-simulated test items situated in an authentic testing environment and facilitate test takers' strategic competence in order to make a better inference or prediction about the test takers' actual performance in real-world setting based on the test result. So having mentioned about strategic competence, so this particular competence includes cognitive strategy and metacognitive strategy that you are familiar with. So like I said earlier, conventional paper-based Army aviation English test mainly focuses on the first asset, like target knowledge of aviation English communication. However, to help and to make the current assessment to be more like accurate or innovative, I would try to include more authentic target context and strategic competence to be integrated in the test design and test performance. So moving to the second corner, observation, then based on this innovative idea of like cognition, focusing on the strategic competence, then we do need to observe test takers' strategic competence as well as target knowledge and skills when implementing aviation English assessment. Then multiple choice question type, MCQ type, is not really enough, as it could generate a very weak observation only. So here, weak observation means it doesn't mean that it is useless. I would say maybe paper-based English assessment or other standardized English tests could still offer some prediction or indication about test takers' real-world performance. But in this particular Army aviation English context, as I highlighted earlier about the test users' expected test uses, then this multiple choice question type seems to be very weak to offer more reliable or valid data for their actual uses in the military context. So that's why it is necessary to simulate target language use, like TLU situations, and provide authentic performance tasks to better observe test takers' sophisticated intellectual and cognitive, metacognitive strategy uses when performing assessment tasks. So referring to my MA advisor, Dr. John Norris's task-based language assessment framework, and taking advantage of the affordances of virtual simulation called Second Life, I could come up with the idea of designing authentic assessment tasks in Second Life. So what I'm going to share later on is how I came up with the assessment tasks based on task-based needs analysis survey and domain expert interview data. So the last triangle is about interpretation. So to better interpret test takers' task performance collected from the virtual environment and to determine the level of task accomplishment, I wanted to add task-centered rating criteria. So the ICAO provided the language-centered aviation English communication assessment criteria, but because this is all about task-based assessment, then I wanted to add additional assessment rating rubric and see how the raters who are expert air traffic controllers and applied linguists could measure the level of task accomplishment in addition to their linguistic performance during the test. So, and also having mentioned about metacognitive strategies or cognitive strategy earlier, to identify test takers' strategic competence during the test performance, I adopted retrospective recall method, think aloud method, right after the test. So in this particular experiment, test takers, when they were performing aviation English tasks in this simulated environment, and all their performance was being recorded, and all the screen was also being recorded. Then right after their performance, I replayed their performance and conducted retrospective recall method to see what they were thinking when they were performing certain air traffic control phraseologies or certain actions or certain behaviors or certain movement in the simulated environment. So, so this is a rough explanation about theoretical foundation behind of this particular study. So, as an explorative study, I wanted to reveal the following research questions. So first, what are the target tasks and task phases in the TLU situation? And what are the indigenous assessment criteria drawn from the domain expert? So the participants were 81 non-native English-speaking military air traffic controllers. And then I adopted task-based needs analysis survey, and interview data from the domain expert, and air traffic control manuals and references in the military context. And the data analysis include document analysis of the ATC manuals and other references. And also I adopted a task difficulty index to provide a basis for the predictive utility of aviation English performance assessment based on Norris 1998 and SCAN 1998, 2001, and 2003. And also the interview data about the domain expert's opinion about different level of aviation English performance. So regarding the first question about skills, knowledge, ability, and processes for aviation English in the TLE situation. So according to the document analysis of the military Army aviation context, the goal of air traffic control training is defined as follows. So to enable air traffic controllers to provide services to Army pilots based on the understanding of the standard procedures and operational guidance, pilot flight situations and flight control facilities, instructions, and flight information. Regarding the providing services to Army pilot, maybe about, let's say, about a decade ago, the Army air traffic control in Korean context, there were actually two different layers. As you may know, there are stationed U.S. Military in Korea. So there used to be a separate air traffic control unit. So about like early 2000 until early 2000, U.S. Army pilots were being operated or communicating with the U.S. military air traffic control unit, and also Korean Army pilots were only communicating with Korean air traffic control units. But after around 2008, the entire Army aviation airspace control or air communications were governed and operated by Korean Army aviation. So because of the change, there have been actually more pressure and actually opportunities for Korean Army air traffic controllers to communicate with U.S. Army pilots in Korean context. So about like 20-something years ago, so when I was working in the Army aviation as a air traffic controllers, we often use Korean language when we were communicating, because pilots were Korean and controllers were Korean. So we don't really have to stick to challenging foreign language, even if we were actually recommended to use it. But since like early 2000, then it was strictly recommended to use English only when they were communicating, regardless like their like mother tongue or so. That's why the domain expert in the Korean Army aviation, like they were more pressured regarding the valid or reliable aviation English assessment, as well as aviation English training in their context. So based on the document analysis and this is the main three procedures in the air traffic control in the Army aviation context: departure procedure, transition procedure, and landing procedure, which you might be quite familiar with. And this is one just rough description of the 40 identified target tasks from the task-based needs analysis. So in total, 40 target tasks were identified across 4 language skills. So here N indicates the number of identified target tasks for each language skill. And I was actually interested in the perceived task importance and task difficulty. So task importance was actually perceived by those survey participants who were air traffic controllers in the military context, and task difficulty was coded by 2 coders who were applied linguists. And then based on the Norris and Scan's task difficulty index scheme, then the task difficulty index is also generated. So the result shows that task importance, the perceived importance value of the target tasks under the category of listening skill is ranked as the highest. And the finding is actually consistent with the actual ATC communication, in which initial radio transmission is primarily initiated by pilot, and main mission of ATC is to provide information to pilot in need. So another index, task difficulty, I wanted to generate this index to help the researcher, myself, or test developers explore ways to differentiate and sequence assessment tasks according to their difficulty level. But as you know well, whether it is perceived important or not, or whether it is difficult or less difficult, all the target tasks should be embedded in the test development anyway. But this task difficulty index, from the researcher's perspective, I found it helpful still when I wanted to come up with the aviation English training or teaching aspect, because this task difficulty index informs us to see what specific target tasks could be more demanding or challenging for those non-native English-speaking air traffic controllers, and that we might consider maybe, even if it is the same performance tasks, maybe some tasks could be more challenging, or some tasks might be less challenging for those test takers. So that task difficulty index maybe could be used for air traffic control, ATC, like training domain. They might consider taking advantage of this task difficulty index in their specific context. So this shows how I coded each target tasks. So this is about listening target tasks. So from task-based needs analysis, 11 listening tasks and their task difficulty index were identified as shown in the table. So task difficulty index was coded by the two raters, and then also I conducted the Cohen's kappa and percent agreement for estimating interquarter reliability, which seems to be okay. And just as a brief explanation about the task difficulty index, there are three major variables of central interest in this index, including like code complexity, which is all about linguistic components, and cognitive complexity is about like all these cognitive processes, and communicative demand. So this task difficulty index could provide a basis for some basis to help the test developers explore ways to maybe even differentiate maybe the test scores given the level of complexity or difficulty, and also maybe find ways to sequence assessment tasks referring to this complexity index. So maybe explaining more about these specific codes, maybe under the code complexity, range indicates the extent to which the code that is inherent in the language of given task represent a greater or less degree of spread. So maybe about the vocabulary items or grammatical structures or pragmatic features or structure of information presented. So it's about the greater or less degree of those components. And input source is about whether or not examinee must decode multiple sources of information input. Like maybe you can think of whether the test taker should listen and read, or depending on the number of input sources, maybe test takers may have more challenges or less difficulties. So input sources about the number of input sources. And cognitive complexity, here first input or output organization specifies the extent to which information must be organized or reorganized for successful test completion. And input availability is about whether or not test takers is required in some significant ways to search for the information when performing the given tasks. And the last variable communicative demand. First, mode indicates whether a given task is interpreted to have a productive component for successful task accomplishment, say writing or speaking, or like receptive like skills or receptive performances. And the last one, response level indicate the extent to which a test takers must interact with the input in a real-time sense. So, so those are the 6 specific variables under the test difficulty index. So, yeah, it is very time-consuming, and also, as I shared earlier, it should be more helpful for ATC training, and yeah, actually there are some more research agenda making use of this test difficulty index and also interpreting their test performance, but as an update, there are different ways of like measuring test difficulty since then, because I stick to Norris and Scan's like conventional test difficulty index, but there have been other updated test difficulty index framework that you may want to refer to. So there should be also another interesting research area that have not been explored much yet. So among the 11 listening tasks in this table, listen to PIREP or pilot report was perceived and reported to be most important target task. In contrast to other reports and flight control, PIREP is not planned and transmitted and very unexpectedly. So PIREP includes like some poor weather condition or forest fires observed by the pilot during their flight. So failures in understanding PIREP could lead to some tremendous losses or some incident or accident. So this is how I coded the each target tasks, and then and I did the same approach to other like language skills as well. So maybe to save the time, maybe I'll just skip to the remaining like speaking, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So this is the summary of the task importance and difficulty index overall, the 4 language skills. So here SRL is all abbreviated for speaking, reading, listening, and writing, and it shows the task importance and difficulty index. And also, in order to make authentic performance tests, of course, individual or specific task matters, but we do need more authentic, like scenario-based task phases. So that's why based on the document analysis and also task-based needs analysis finding, I came up with the specific task topics. So the analysis of target tasks according to the 4 language skills shows the characteristics of individual target tasks and how target tasks could be interrelated with other skills, because controllers and pilots are always listening and speaking. So that's why considering these interrelated features of aviation English tasks in real world setting, so the analysis of task topic across the 4 language skill is presented in this table. So I first came up with the task topics such as like weather, flight plan, transition, landing, PIRAP, etc. And then this is the specific task specification based on the individual target tasks and task topics, and document analysis of the military army manuals. So those are some examples of task specification for departure procedure, landing procedure, and transition procedure. So this is the final blueprint, like before the actual designing of or embedding of specific target tasks in a virtual environment. I came up with this final blueprint of 7 target language use situations, including specific task items per task situation. So, for example, number 2, change its flight plan. It includes 3 expected responses, including mixed language skills, focusing listening, writing, and speaking. So this is an example of task situation number 2, change its flight plan. So the task includes like listening task number 5, listen to change its flight plan, and writing task number 5, take note of change its flight plan. So the prompt is given to the test takers in the virtual simulation environment. And then the scenario is also embedded, designed in the virtual interactive setting. So the test takers are expected to communicate with the audio recorded pilot. So actually, pilot voice, so pilot scripts were already audio recorded and embedded in the Second Life virtual testing setting. So the test takers are in the system, then they will be listening to pilot requests or pilot input through the pre-recorded audio in the system. So this is the actual sequence. So when the test takers sign in the virtual testing setting, then the pilot pre-recorded voice will be actually heard, like Carol Ground, Unicorn A44 on ramp, request start engine. Then test takers are supposed to respond to this request. So this is one simple scenario for change its flight plan tasks. So the above satellite image is the actual airbase from Google Maps. So I think it came from Google Maps, so I believe it's not confidential anymore. So when you see the tip of the blue arrow, that is the actual location of air traffic control tower in this airbase. So based on this real map, I simulated the virtual airbase from the viewpoint of air traffic control tower. So when the test takers are signed in this system, then maybe it looks like this. So the test takers are the actual avatar of the system, but I took the images of those avatar test takers, but the actual test takers cannot see this image because this is is my own like supervisor's viewpoint. So when the test takers log in, then they can see from this test taker avatar's viewpoint. So they can just see the screen and airfield and aircraft. Of course, it is not really like genuine. It is, I just try to simulate as much as possible, but still there are a lot of limitations that I need to share later. But this is how the identified target tasks, task phases were embedded in this virtual aviation English test setting. And regarding the indigenous assessment criteria, test takers performance were actually rated using two rubrics. One is language-centered rating rubric by the ICAO's like LPR like framework, and also I try to come up with the task-centered rating criteria as well, because I really wanted the domain expert, like expert air traffic controllers assessment or measurement of the actual test performance, to what extent the test takers perform, so that we can make better prediction about the test takers performance in a real world setting based on this test result. So I asked the domain expert who were like expert air traffic controllers with minimum like 15 or 20 years ATC experiences to share their like expected like job performance about excellent, acceptable, and unacceptable level of job performance of each task. So these are some interview excerpts from the study, and then this indigenous assessment criteria, then the participants' open-ended responses and interview data on the expected ATC performance criteria. Based on the thematic analysis, I could come up with those four thematic groups focusing on ATC skills, communication skills, and ATC knowledge, and controller characteristics. I should mention that this is just from this particular participant and particular setting. So I don't want and I cannot generalize the indigenous assessment criteria of military aviation English from this model. This is just explorative model from this particular Korean Army aviation context. So I'm sure what you will find will be actually, I would say, different from this model, and I'm sure it can still be a good reference and see, maybe you may find some differences later on when you conduct your own like indigenous assessment criteria research. So regarding the ATC skills, this is regarded as the most important criteria to the expert controllers, as it could function as one of the critical conditions to differentiate expert from novice air traffic controllers. So, but unlike air traffic control knowledge, ATC knowledge, or communication skills, ATC skills seems to be developed over time. And with authentic experiential learning via real-world test performance in TLU situation. So this ATC skills seems to be one of the key criteria that could differentiate experienced or expert air traffic controllers from the novice air traffic controllers. In this particular research setting, in this Korean Army aviation context, some novice air traffic controllers could still perform quite well in their like ATC knowledge or communication skills, especially communication skills, because some of them got like over 900 out of 99 in the TOEIC test, or some of them had extensive study abroad experience. Then their English communication skill is like near native like, yet their ATC skills are not that good as other experienced or expert air traffic controllers whose communication skills might be not as good as those novice air traffic controllers. And regarding the ATC knowledge, the domain expert also valued this criteria, which include acronym, abbreviation, local ATC procedures, and emergency procedures. And regarding communication skills, as highlighted by ICAO's LPR, Korean military air traffic controllers also remarked on this significance of communication skills, as their native language is Korean and English is regarded as a foreign language. So controllers highlighted the need for articulate and accurate English pronunciation and active listening skills for efficient radio telephony. And the last criteria, the set of controller attitude, this is still actually very challenging for me to from the test developer's perspective, how I can make use of these controller characteristics in the assessment or measurement of the performance. So the last criteria of controller characteristics is noted mainly in non-verbal or affective aspect of air traffic controls in real-world target language use situations. From the socio-cultural aspect, it involves the expectation of controllers' determined manner when communicating with pilots, who are usually ranked much higher. It is not always the case, but sometimes those high-ranking military pilots ask for less appropriate or pilot-centered requests that might violate air safety, and the controller's attitude aspect, and also mainly involves test takers' level of anxiety. So experienced controllers have observed numerous cases in which novice air traffic controllers became panicked, and it negatively influenced their air traffic control performance. So, and also military air traffic controllers pointed out the behavior aspect as a component of the indigenous rating criteria. And because sometimes when the controllers became more burdened with heavy traffic, then they often tended to speak much faster, or that might lower the accuracy of aviation English communication as well. So, so this is the summarization of the 4 indigenous assessment criteria that I could find from the study. So regarding the potential significance of the study, it might provide some foundation for an aviation English test battery in a virtual setting, and providing empirical evidence to support authentic task development for language teaching and testing, and also exploring the use of task-centered rating rubric to provide diagnostic feedback. Yet, as I mentioned earlier, there are numerous limitations as well. So including generalization issue with very small participant numbers and characteristics of the participant. And also the survey was conducted remotely when I was working in Japan. So and also the survey include a lot of questions. So there might be some validity issue in the distance online survey data collection, and also some reliability issue in the like rating the task difficulty. Of course, the two quarters did their best. There might be some reliability issues as well, and also validity issues regarding the content coverage, because the study didn't dare not focus the entire scope of Army aviation like target language use. It mainly focuses on the departure, landing, and transition procedures as the like pilot or preliminary study. And also there might be some weighting issue of task difficulty level. This is not just for this particular study, but the task difficulty index itself seems to be maybe potentially problematic, because the 6 variables were equally counted either 1 or 0. So in total, 6, the coded result 6 is the most difficult task. Yet researchers are skeptical or concerned whether we should equally assign the same value for these 6 specific subdomains of task difficulty index. So this is also something that maybe test developers can explore further. I think this should be also another interesting research topic and domain for those ESP test developers, how we can tweak or make some meaningful changes in the weighting in task difficulty level in their future test development. Okay, so this is the reference I cited, and sorry for overrunning, and I really appreciate your attention and support. So if you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you so much.
Dr. Park, I received a couple of questions in the chat box. I'm going to just read aloud to you. The first questions from N. Her question was about like this: I can anticipate ATC tasks related to listening and speaking skills, but what ATC tasks require reading and writing skills? Can you give me an example of a reading task and writing task?
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for the question. Yes, indeed, compared to listening and writing, yes, reading and writing tasks are very limited. So for example, for writing tasks, pilots are also air traffic controllers should be able to like compose or write like we call it flight information. So we do need to write authentic and accurate flip. Sometimes we might be very rushed to compose this flip, because sometimes pilots are changing their flight plan in the air. So then we need to take note. So it is actually writing, but not just writing. It's connected with like a dictation, like listen and write. And also we sometimes need to write some like abbreviations or some jargons or some symbols, maybe for some PIREP or some sometimes we are like rushed to put down some memos based on the genre specific context, and also regarding the reading, then sometimes we need to read what is that, we need to reading includes, sometimes we need to decode the changing weather forecast. So weather forecast is not a descriptive way. It is all coded with symbols and jargons and abbreviations. So we have to be able to comprehend and decode those all specific jargons and text or discourse information. And also maybe regarding reading, we sometimes have to double check the airbase, like landing, departure, or transition procedures given in the manual. So we sometimes need to check those flight information books. So ATC is not just about speaking and listening. The controllers do need to practice to perform certain, not many, but certain limited reading and writing performances as well. Yeah.
So another question from Anne was about the importance index, about the 11 listening tasks. So her question is, why this important index change for the same task?
Why the
on one page it was 1 through 11, and on the second page it was a higher importance level. I didn't know how it changed between the tasks were the same, but the importance level changed.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. And that is actually very critical and actually big question for me too when I coded the data. Okay, so maybe let me share the screen to better explain. Okay. Okay, so
on this page, the index importance index went between 4 and 5, and on the previous page it was a lower importance index.
You mean this one?
Yeah, on these two different pages, the importance index varied, but the tasks were the same. I don't mean to take up a lot of other people's time. Please take other questions. Yeah.
Okay, so Anne, sorry for so the important index is the same, but why the difficulty index different? Or sorry for my
Anne's question was like importance index for the same task change across pages. I think that's
really
question. Yeah. Or maybe not the same task.
Yeah, I think it's all about it's all different skills, so listening and speaking, reading and writing. So yeah, I think
I might have misread your pages.
Right. I think
there's no identical listening task with different index. Yeah. Okay.
And then I think we have to move on to another question was about when is colloquial communication is actually used in this ATC context, colloquial communication.
Okay, good. So colloquial tasks were actually performed actually before the actual simulation tasks. As Korean Army Aviation unit very often like operate together with US US Army ATC Air Brigade. So we do communicate often with those US Army air traffic controllers, but when it comes to the cooperation or those the exercises with the U.S. Army controllers, we are sometimes like facing opportunities for this casual conversation, not really about air traffic control, but it's about like as a military ATC, they have some chit-chatting and some just casual conversation. So some Korean air traffic controllers expressed their need to get tested or to be trained for this colloquial English communication skills in addition to aviation English communication. So this colloquial conversation was being tested in the beginning of the assessment. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah.
And then two more questions. One question from Anna Liga Silva. So congratulations, Dr. Park, for the very insightful talk. And my question is, why background content knowledge was not included in the test difficulty variables?
Test difficulty variables. You mean background knowledge?
Content knowledge was not included.
Yes.
That's her.
Anna, would you elaborate a bit more for me?
Yes, of course, because when you were showing the indigenous criteria, we saw that for ATC skills and ATC knowledge, their feedback was maintaining aircraft separation, situation awareness, and all these things relates to the knowledge, the background knowledge, the specific background knowledge that they would have, not in terms of language, but in terms of controlling air traffic. So my question is, those things, yes, they showed in your results, but why did you not consider this type of knowledge as one of the variables for difficulty? Don't you think that it was difficult for them to perform the tests because there was a lack of background knowledge for them? That's my question.
So you mean why these indigenous assessment criteria were not actually implemented in the task difficulty index generation? Is it?
Yes, yes. Why they were not included as one of the variables when you consider the task difficulty?
Okay, good question. I think Anna, that question is actually your next research topic.
Yes. A tricky one, Moon-Young. By the way, so that there's no Professor Park is my co-supervisor for my postdoc research.
I'm honored to work with you, Anna. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, Anna, I think that's actually very, very, very critical question that I'm actually having in my mind, because I came up with this indigenous assessment criteria after this explorative study as kind of end result, I mean preliminary findings. So I really wanted to make use of this indigenous criteria for better predict test takers' performance. Yet then I should rerun the experiment and need to analyze this indigenous assessment criteria, or maybe recode test takers performance based on this indigenous assessment criteria later, based on your collaboration and support. Then maybe we can make use of my participants' actual audio recorded, video recorded performance data using this indigenous assessment criteria too. So, but one limitation I could think of is that this indigenous assessment criteria is for the real world performance, but what the test takers did is in a simulated environment. So in that case, maybe test takers, especially controllers' characteristics or the use of those skill or knowledge is still quite limited to this simulated environment. So of course it could still somehow measure their performance under those criteria. But this particular indigenous assessment criteria is aiming for the real world performance. So there might be some room for improvement or some extra work to adapt this criteria into virtual simulated assessment and measurement, I guess. Yeah. But I do appreciate your critical question, and this should be on a very interesting idea, and maybe we can work together for our future research project on this topic, if you have time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Park.
Okay, thank you, Anna, for your
Questions. And last but not least, we have a question from, wait a minute, Jashin. You could actually unmute yourself and you could voice your question to Dr. Park.
Hi, Dr. Park. I'm
Hello.
Kirsten. Hi, thanks so much for a wonderful presentation. Well, I just have a few questions about the evaluators. So I'm wondering what kind of training did these evaluators or assessmenters have? Like, did they have just the normal English assessment training, or they also were required to have some professional aviation background knowledge to do this? Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, for the measurement component, I mentioned earlier that I adopted two rating criteria. One is language-centered criteria based on the ICAO's LPR, and task-centered rating criteria was including the level of successful task accomplishment. So for language-centered criteria, it was rated by two applied linguists, one native English speaker and one non-native English speaker, but near native like applied linguist. So those two applied linguists measure those performance using language-centered rubric. And for the task-centered rubric, expert air traffic controllers were invited and trained to measure those test takers like test performance. And I asked them to specifically provide the written description about the regions and specific rationales why they marked each test taker's performance as successful, acceptable or unacceptable. So they were, they received some training to verbalize and to be able to express their rationales, because they were military controllers, not like researchers or like coders. So they at first they were very they felt very awkward and uncomfortable, like providing extra like descriptions and rationale regarding the performance level, because they do have like intuitive, like some intuition or some gut feeling about the successful level of performance, because they were veteran controllers themselves. But when they were asked to verbalize or to provide written, like specific written descriptions, then they did have hard time to like express why they believe like test taker A its performance is not acceptable or just only acceptable level. But after training, then they became more comfortable, and the description was much more clearer based on the radar training. Yeah. Thank you so much for the question regarding the radar issues. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jashin. Eric, yes,
Question he can type, so I think he could unmute himself and just ask question.
Yeah, hey Moon-Young, this is Eric, and hi everybody. Hi from Hong Kong. Hi Anne. Hi Anna.
Yeah.
Just a really short one. Any update on virtual reality? You know, when you did your original studies with the Second Life, and now there are many of these simulations, VR options. Where are you when it comes to these, I guess, currently available options nowadays?
Okay, thank you, Eric, for your question. Yes, for the most recent update, yeah, I actually, so when I was working in Hong Kong, I collaborated with the aviation research lab in Science Park. So we developed an AI chatbot for aviation communication. So the simulated chatbot environment is not like 3D setting, it's a 2D setting, but the aircraft are actually interactively moving back and forth based on the conversation with the chatbot. So we developed a specific chatbot for air traffic control practices about 2 years ago, and then we finished the pilot test with some civil aircraft pilot or flight attendant and some student pilots in Hong Kong. So I'm actually analyzing the data to see and to see their perception about their interaction with the chatbot, especially designed for air traffic control practices. So the procedures were mainly about landing, departure, and transition, which were based on my previous studies. So yeah, we are actually in an earlier stage of like developing it further. So we actually aim to make it as a commercial mobile application for future like student controllers or pilot ATC practices, but yeah, we are still in an early stage at the moment. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay, so I think that
One final question is kind of is lead to us the big picture of your talk. So the whole conceptual framework is important. So how can it be communicated to ICAO for improving test guidance for ATCs? How does it compare with the ICAO's testing of ATCs?
Okay, yeah, very fundamental question, Professor Shin. Yeah. So yeah, there's a good meaningful anecdote. Me and Professor Dan Douglas, who were former like the president of ILTA, and he was one of my dissertation committee member, and yeah, my very respectful teacher, advisor, and friends still. So when I was like finishing up this air traffic, this ATC project, I was actually funded by the Pearson testing company, because Pearson has its own aviation English assessment for commercial like pilots based on the ICAO's LPR. So I could make use of the so the Pearson basically offered quite a number of test user seats for my experiment. So I didn't share it today, but I did collect the test data from this ICAO LPR based Pearson Aviation English Assessment test result. In addition to the task-centered rating score and also language-centered rating score based on this simulated air traffic control test. So yeah, I haven't actually published it yet, but I'm actually quite interested in exploring further about the data. So what I found from the Pearson's aviation English test data from my test participants who are actual air traffic controllers, then the findings from the ICAO's like language-centered aviation English assessment result highly correlated with the like test of English for international communication, TOEIC test score, and also test takers like communication skills in general. So going back to Professor Douglas Dan's anecdote, then also I invited Dan to take this Pearson's aviation English test, and he just lost. He almost got the full mark, but I was ranked as the I think level 5, where he was marked as level 7. So he was laughing at me and said, "Hey, Moon-young, you used to work as a air traffic controller, but I got a much higher score in the aviation English test." So this actually shows that ICAO's LPR must be a very practical, efficient, and needed like rating rubric for like ongoing pilot or controllers aviation English assessment. Yet because ICAO asks not to include any like specific ATC jargons or specific ATC knowledge embedded in the test. They mainly wanted to measure the plain English under the theme of aviation. So given this assessment use or testing purposes, I think ICAO's LPR or ICAO's aviation English assessment policy seems to be working well. But from the test users or domain expert perspective, they will want more accurate or more reliable like test result to better predict their novice controllers expected like performances in a real world setting. Then in that case, we shouldn't really separate particular ATC knowledge or ATC skills. So that's why I think there must be a certain role of task-centered or test-based language assessment in the aviation English assessment for sure. So that means the given ICAO's aviation English assessment could be generating a very weak prediction or very weak inference about test takers' actual job performance. So in that case, to better supplement, I don't want to like ban or go against ICAO's policy, but if possible, it would be more helpful if we can supplement the current ICAO's aviation English assessment policy, including task-centered or more context-specific aviation English performance, focusing on including task-centered rating criteria, so that the test result could offer better inference or prediction for test users, test takers, and test administrators. So yeah, this will be my overall expectation and maybe future directions. Yeah. About aviation English assessment, and its innovation.
I think
Go for it.
Yeah, say amen and go for it.
And let's go together.
Okay, I think we have to really stop now. It's already 9:30. We're really running out of time. I really appreciate Dr. Park's really insightful talk today. First of all, I want to just say thank you again for Dr. Park and other attendees today.